really the vital lessons of Scripture as both Numbers and Deuteronomy unveil them to us. Help us to understand your heart and the key desires that you have as you are explaining to Israel how they ought to live to reflect a greater reality, a reality that is explicitly expressed in the book of Deuteronomy. And may we just this morning capture those critical lessons, help it to shape how we view Scripture, and even more, how we understand you and your plan and how that culminates in a prophet like Moses, the Lord Jesus Christ, who is the one who gives us the final covenant. And so give us the strength today to love you. Give us strength today to process information rapidly. Give us the strength today to take all of that to be more deeply passionate about worshiping you. So grant us that ability now. Be honored at this time. Shape and mold us further. In your name we pray. Amen. So we've been talking about Numbers. We've been walking through that book, and it is appropriate to do so because, as we've seen in Genesis, God has this agenda to preserve the line of seed, to prove ultimately in the end that He is the creator of this universe, that He is the most glorious one. We have seen how that plays out in Exodus as God has launched a redemption, revealed who He is, and there is a tension. On one hand, God is a forgiving God. On the other hand, God is a just God. And therefore, how do you live with such a holy God? Well, that's answered in the book of Leviticus, where we see God's holiness displayed. And in Numbers, we don't just see God's holiness, perhaps better put, defined in Leviticus. Now we see it displayed in the book of Numbers. We see it displayed. And Israel is to announce this as they march in the wilderness before the world. But God will also demonstrate this in a series of judgments, also known as refining His people. And so we've seen God judges His people. They complain. He judges them. He judges the leadership. He judges them particularly for their lack of faith because they don't want to enter the what? The promised land. You guys remember this. Good. And then after that, there's a series of judgments that ensue on top of this. And again, all of that and all of its dynamics is not just to show that God is going to judge Israel. It is to also show that God will judge the world. And along that line, you need to see, and I'm just going to make a passing reference to this, but you need to read Numbers 14 carefully. You need to read Numbers 14 carefully. Chapter 14, that is. And God in Numbers 14 is discussing with Moses. He's a mediator after all. He had to mediate the first time around with the golden calf. He mediates again in Numbers 14, and he actually appeals to Exodus 34, where God says and reveals His name, that He is a God gracious and compassionate. Now, along that line, Moses and God in their discussion reveal, and this is the wording here, and this is so important, he says, "Will not your glory fill the earth?" That's what he says. Your glory will fill the earth. That is what He is after. He is that He will fill the earth with His glory. Very, very important phrase. Because what this shows is two things. It shows first this, that God's plan of holiness is not just for Israel, it's for the what? For the world. What God is doing for Israel, with Israel, toward Israel, in Israel, through Israel, is not just for Israel, it is for the world. Furthermore, where have you had such where have you heard the language fill the earth? Genesis 1, yes? Be what and what? Be fruitful and multiply and what? Fill the earth. Man filling the earth, going back to Genesis 1, man filling the earth is actually the extension of what? Of who? God filling the earth with His what? Glory. When man fills the earth, and man is the image bearer of God, he is the one who reflects and points to God Himself, or the perfect image of God, who is Christ. In doing so, he is disseminating and reflecting the very glory of God, filling the earth. Okay? Filling the earth. This is very, very important because it demonstrates that God's agenda for Israel and the world actually goes back to Genesis 1. Just like we've always been saying, that's the thesis. That's the main point of Scripture, is the exhibition and demonstration of the majestic, beautiful, right and good glory of God. And of course, all of this revolves around holiness. This isn't just a tertiary issue. This is the issue that connects the horizontal with the vertical of the totality of God's plan. And so that is what Israel's announcing, and they've already been starting to announce this as people have attacked them and they attack back, and they show this is a holy war. This is God enacting judgment. His holiness isn't just to refine Israel and show in every way that they must be perfect like God is perfect. This is a standard for the world. However, at the same time, like we said, God is not just going to show this through the physical issues and attacks that Israel experiences, but a what? Not just physical, but a what? Spiritual. And this leads us to the issue of Balaam. This actually provides an opportunity for God to reveal his agenda to the world. Because everyone's wondering, okay, fine, we know that God is on Israel's side. Maybe we can try to manipulate this God to go against Israel, but that provides God an opportunity to talk definitively to these nations and explain his purposes. So we are in letter K. Are we there? Letter K, deliverance from Moab's spiritual attack. Let me kind of set the scene quickly, and then we've got to run through these oracles, which are just so important. I wish we had more time to delve into them. You should have more time to delve into them in your devotions and such, because they are rich. Nevertheless, here's the situation. Like I just said, these pagans, they know that the reason they can never win on the physical level, they can never win there, is because the God of Israel is behind Israel. The God of Israel is behind Israel. So their goal is to, in a sense, get a God whisperer, a supernatural whisperer, to come and try to move God to be on their side instead of Israel's side. Does this start to make sense to everybody? This is why they get a guy named Balaam. By the way, Balaam is a famous individual. Okay? When you go to Israel, you must go to Israel, and you decide, hey, maybe I should go to Jordan because I'm in Israel and Jordan's right next door. And there are these, and you can go to Petra and stuff, but there's this place called Deir Allah, Deiralla. The Deir Allah texts actually mention Balaam by name. Same Balaam. What does this show us? A, of course he's historical. We already knew that. But B, he's a famous God whisperer. Okay, he's famous, which is significant. Because A, it shows that Balak got a famous guy involved. But B, the message that God told Balaam disseminated. Why? Because Balaam is a famous guy. Does this start to make sense to everybody? And so everything has been strategically laid out in the historical situation for God's plan to advance, and Moses latches onto that. Moses is going to explain that and give us insight into that. Y'all with me on this? Now, I think we understand this whole talking donkey incident. Balaam, at first God says, you're not going to go. Then God says to Balaam, if they come back to talk with you again, then you may go with them. Balaam kind of follows those instructions. He just goes, but he doesn't wait for them to talk with him. Are y'all with us? So he doesn't really follow God to the letter of the law. You with me? And God's point to Balaam is, if I'm going to really explain everything, if I'm really going to say it, then you've got to say it not just an approximation, but what? Word for word. That means you've got to obey things not just kind of, but to the very what? Letter of the law. And so that's where the whole talking donkey comes into the business where Balaam starts to realize this God is not like anybody else I've encountered. He is truly sovereign. He controls creation. And as a result of this, I'm going to say exactly what God said. Y'all with me on this? That's how this situation is set up. Now, there are a series of oracles that Balaam provides. There are 4 of them. 4 of them. And I'm going to give you a summary of 3. We're going to concentrate on 1 so that we can keep moving. So here is the first oracle. The first oracle is and concerns that Israel will be blessed. Israel will be blessed. And as a result, the nations will be blessed. As a result, the nations will be blessed. Israel will be blessed, and the nations thereby will be blessed. You could put it this way. That's the outcome. That's the end. Now, you already should have known that that's the outcome in the end, because talking about Israel being blessed and the nations being blessed in them, where have you heard that kind of language before? Abrahamic what? Covenant. The Abrahamic covenant. But here's the deal. Remember what is going on in context. It's not just that Balaam is reiterating a truth you already know. He's reiterating that truth not to Israel, but to the what? To who? Not to Israel, but to the nations. The nations are learning this agenda. Israel is actually engaging in witness without even having to do a thing. Okay, without having to do a thing. They are engaging in witness. And so Balak says, hey, there is this thing called the Abrahamic covenant. Let me explain it to you. And I'm going to say it exactly the way God wanted me to, because I learned my lesson with the donkey. All right? Now, verse 19. Verse 19 of chapter 23, what we have is the second oracle. Is the second oracle. And what this demonstrates, okay, what this demonstrates is this. We talked about the end. This is what's going to happen in the end. But you need to talk about the present to the end. That's what we call endurance. That's what we're going to call endurance, or faithfulness. Faithfulness. And what do we see in the opening line of verse 19? God is not a what? Man, that he should what? Lie. What is Balaam's point? What God said he will do, because he cannot what? Lie. By the way, this is a very important verse on numerous levels. Fundamentally, it is important because obviously it shows this is why God will be faithful. His plan will carry out exactly the way it is. These promises about the Abrahamic covenant, they cannot fail because he cannot what? Lie. But second, since that is God's character, this is a very important verse that establishes God's truthfulness, doesn't it? God is not a man that he would what? Lie. This establishes a fundamental theological reality about God leveraged to a certain purpose in this narrative and in God's plan, that in the end he will always be faithful. That means this is what God is proclaiming through Balaam. This is the end. Abrahamic covenant. This is the way it will be. Israel will have this kind of blessing, and they will have this kind of influence and impact on the nations, and no one can what? Stop it. Everyone got that? No one can stop it. That's Oracle 2. You can't change this destiny. This is not like Back to the Future and you can manipulate time. Sorry, there's one destiny, and this is it, because God is not a man that can lie. Everyone got that so far? Third. So, each time the people who hire Balaam, they get mad because, oh, you blessed them and now you cursed us and blah, blah, blah. Okay, we get that. So, third. Okay, third. We see this in chapter 24, verse 5. 24, verse 5. And at this moment, we see a more in-depth picture of the glorious outcome of the Abrahamic covenant. We see the glorious outcome of the Abrahamic covenant. But here's where it gets very, very interesting. Okay? Here's where it gets very, very interesting. Is we begin to see overtones in, say, verses 8 and 9 of a king. that this glorious outcome that we just talked about in Oracle 1, that cannot fail because of Oracle 2, this glorious outcome revolves around a king. Now, you guys should know already, that king, we know him earlier per Genesis 3:15 as the what? As the seed. And that seed goes through what tribe again? What tribe? Judah. Because that's the what kind of tribe that starts with an R? Royal tribe. Are y'all with me on this? So we've already seen that theology building, and Balaam is providing that theology to the nations. This is God's agenda. So you could put it this way. If you haven't been following the story up to this point, by now this is the cliff notes. Yes? God has a plan. There's the Abrahamic covenant. He will do it because he can't lie. It's going to be wonderful. It's going to restore creation. That's why Numbers 24:5 explains things the way it does. And it all revolves around a what? A king. One guy who's like a lion, just like Judah was a what? Lions. See the connections here? And that's going to go forward. So, this all makes sense. Oracle 4. Oracle 4 hones in on the king because he really is center stage of this entire agenda. And we know that from what passage? Genesis what? 3:15. We know the king is the most important player on the map. That is the one who's responsible for all of this. Everything has been preserved unto that. So Balaam's going to make a big deal of that. And with that in mind, let's talk about Numbers 24, verse 17 and following. So, someone start reading. Stop. All right. So immediately, when he starts to say, I see him, but not now, I behold him, but not here, Balaam is looking to the distant future, not to the present. This is important because Balaam is looking at the climax of history. That's the kind of language. This isn't something in the near future, here today, gone tomorrow. This is something that we all hope for. This is what we look forward to. This is about the climax of history. Keep going.
A star shall come out of Jacob.
Stop. So, a star shall come out of Jacob. Now, lots of things going on here. First, star language, I guess that's what we would say. Imagery of a star is utilized of a rising, ascending, dominant king. Y'all got that? Language of a star is used of a rising, ascending, dominant king. Now, later on, the book of Daniel will pick up on this language. Later on, the book of Daniel will pick up on this language that to announce the star, the one who is cosmically, the one who impacts and shapes everything by his light, so to speak, a star will announce the star. Get the play on words? Everyone see how that works? Christ is the star. The Messiah is the star. The seed is the star. But there will be a star that announces that star. Y'all, does that make sense to everybody? Which sets up for what? The wise men, yeah? In Matthew. Y'all with me on this? And so this is beginning the whole trajectory toward that. Okay? And by the way, how did the wise guys ever figure out that there was going to be a star that announced the king anyway? They read Daniel and they connected it back with what? Numbers. And how did they get all this data? Because Balaam is what? Famous. And he disseminated this information amongst the nations. Does this start to make sense to everybody? And so that's how they got the info. Because God's plan worked. Speak to me.
Could it also be connecting back to when God promised Abraham that his offering would be more than the stars of heaven?
Is this passage connecting with that passage? Not in this case. This is a different language, and so the connection's not exactly that way. One deals with numbers. This deals with prominence.
Could you, real quick, go through the backstory of Balaam, with Balak and all that? Because I was kind of confused with what happened with that whole thing.
Yeah, just real quick summary. The backstory would be that Balak tried to hire Balaam to be that God whisperer, but Balaam was going to go with him but didn't really obey God. That's why God had to really clamp down on him to get him to say exactly what he's supposed to say. So he's now explaining to Balak, who wanted Balaam to kind of get God to go against Israel, what God's agenda really is. And that's what's going on there. Yeah. Good question. So here we are back to Oracle 4, the final things that are said. So we got this star thing. Keep going.
And a scepter shall rise out of Israel.
Stop. And a scepter shall rise from Israel. Everyone hear that language of scepter? Do you guys remember the prophecy of Genesis 49, 10, and 11 about Shiloh? Everyone remember that? And he's going to tie his donkey to the vine. Remember that? Remember that prophecy? Everyone kind of with me here? If you look in that prophecy, it will say this: the scepter will not depart from Judah. Everyone hear that word scepter? Same word scepter here. Balaam is unveiling and fleshing out a theology of Genesis. Not to Israel, who should be already aware of this, but to who? The nations. So that they're aware of it too. Keep going.
It shall crush the forehead of Moab.
Stop. Where have you heard that language before? Crushing the what? Serpent. Same language. Same kind of phraseology. And so what you have now is the clarity of, hey, Abrahamic covenant, Genesis 49:11, Genesis 3:15. We have all of this with the king. We have all of this with the king. In fact, it goes one step forward beyond that. Look at verse 19. Keep reading it.
Israel is doing valiantly, and one.
Oh wait, verse 19?
Yes.
Okay, maybe verse 18.
Edom shall be dispossessed. Seir also, his enemies, shall be dispossessed. Israel is doing valiantly.
Keep going.
From Jacob shall exercise dominion.
Stop. Everyone hear that? The one from Jacob will exercise dominion. Everyone hear that? The word dominion here is not often used so far in the Old Testament. In fact, the last major time you actually heard that word used, it was this phrase: let us make man in our what? Image, so that he might what? Have dominion. Same word. What this person is, what our friend Balaam, if you want to call him that, is explaining is this: this king, he's nothing short of who? I mean, who is that said of originally in Genesis 1? Adam. This is the second Adam. That's what you have to understand. This guy, he is Adam. So this theology of king has now incorporated Abrahamic covenant. He has incorporated Genesis 49. He has incorporated Genesis 3:15. He has incorporated Adam, all in one. Now, we should have already been able to see that, because if you've been walking carefully through Genesis, you would have seen those connections. But in case you missed it, and of course for the Gentiles, the nations, they didn't really know it, now we have it official. Does this make sense to everybody? Balaam's prophecy is so critical. Who is this king? He is the Genesis 3:15, leader of the Abrahamic covenant, person of Genesis 49:11, second Adam. That is the king. That is the king according to Numbers 24:17 and following. And so now the agenda is clear. People are wondering, Israel, are you here for peace? Are you here for war? How do we stop you? And the answer is you can't stop Israel. And their agenda ultimately is what? Peace, rest, blessing. But to do that, you need holy, and you guys aren't. But there is one to come who will rule over everything, and that is Israel, not just Israel, but Israel's what? Israel's king, per Genesis 3:15. Does this start to make sense to everybody? And now Israel's agenda is announced to the world. Israel's agenda is announced to the world. Does this make sense to everybody? Y'all with me on this? Okay. Having understood all of this, the nations are frustrated with Balaam. And Balaam's like, look, I don't want to give you your money back, but I have a way. I have a way to manipulate Israel to actually get what you want, kind of. Because I understand now that Israel's God is what? Holy. Y'all with me on this? We've seen that in the wilderness. We now have encountered that firsthand. He's a God who cannot lie. He will not change. He's holy. Okay. So this is what I'll do. I'll tell you how to kind of manipulate the situation, and that gets us into the next letter, the next point, dealing with apostates, chapter 25. You all there? This is a massively important event. You need to know it. This is the event of Baal Peor. Baal Peor. We there? Numbers 25. You can't get God to go against Israel, but you can get Israel to what? Go against God. And we know when Israel has gone against God throughout like the last 40 years, what has always happened to them? They get judged. They get punished. Yes? So, this is what happens at Baal Peor. All these women from Moab come into the camp and seduce the men of Israel. Okay? And lead them into idolatry. Y'all with me on this? This, if you thought about, hey, how does this refining process work for Israel? You had lay people complain. You had leaders who sinned. You had people who didn't believe. You had people who violated the Sabbath. You had people who rebelled against God's holy system of the priesthood. You had people who didn't trust God relative to the snakes, but some people who did. You had people who did all kinds of things, disobeyed God as a leader of Israel. That would be Moses. But this is higher than everything else. This is kind of the rock bottom. This is national apostasy. Y'all with me on this? It's not just that Israel stopped believing in Yahweh or didn't trust Yahweh. Now they're going to other what? Gods. They're not just saying, I don't really want you a lot. They're saying, I want somebody else. This is full-blown national apostasy. Full-blown apostasy. Really, this just reveals who they are. Right? Reveals the totality of who they are. Finally, it all comes out in the open, and Balaam is instrumental in causing this stumbling. Now, one last thing to say, or not one last thing, but one thing of note. Look at chapter 26 for just a second. Should be like one page flip over, something like that, yeah? Do you see what's 26? It's another what? Anyone know? Census. Do you guys remember me saying that the book of Numbers is arranged around two censi, or whatever? You all remember that? The first census is for the first generation. The second census is what? For the next generation. Chapter 25 is the final moment that God eliminates all of the what? Of the first generation. Y'all with me on this? This is the final judgment. And it makes sense because this is so massive in nature. So, things are going bad. Things are going very bad. And you need to learn two things from this event. A couple things from this event. One, obviously, you need to see this is a massive demonstration of apostasy. But two, you need to learn something. Notice what God demands. Look at verse 4. It's going to be very important. Verse 4. What does God say? Read it out loud. Stop. Take all the what? Chiefs. How do you satisfy God's wrath against a nation? You take their leaders. Why? The principle of corporate solidarity. You could kill everybody, but alternatively, you could kill the people that are them, the people that perfectly represent them. Does this make sense? So take their leaders. And what do you do with them? Keep going. You're doing a great job. Stop. And what? Stop. And what? Hang them. Yes? Hang them. Hanging back in those days was the most severe and serious punishment. It was the most severe and serious punishment. It exceeded all executions because it not only included a painful death, it included bearing shame. Bearing shame. It included the full gamut of humiliation and wrath, justice. And God says, you do that so that they bear something. In fact, what do they bear? Keep reading. Stop. Before in the sun, can't, why not in darkness? Because if it's in the sun, it's a public what? Display. It needs to be public. It needs to be before the nation because this is on behalf of what? The nation. Keep going. Final phrase.
That the fierce anger of the Lord may turn away from Israel.
Stop. This is all about God's wrath. There is one way to deal with real apostasy, the apostasy of the human heart. There's only one way to truly satisfy it. You get the leaders, and you execute them in a way that exacts all of God's wrath against them as a public display of His justice. That's the only way that this is going to work. Does it start to make sense to everybody? And if you already are a thinking person here, you think, whoa, this is setting up for Christ on the cross. This is the background of Deuteronomy 21. We might probably talk about it that much, but we'll talk about it a little bit. Cursed is the one who what? Hangs on a tree. Now you know why, right? Because that is exactly what these guys are going to go through. They're going to go through the most painful execution because it reflects how they are cursed. They are under God's judicial wrath. They are pronounced by God as those who bear His corporate, covenant, national indignation so that they will turn away His wrath. And Deuteronomy 21, cursed is the one who hangs on the tree, is then applied to Jesus in a whole bunch of texts like Galatians 3:13. Does this start to make sense to everybody? This is where it's going. You have a theology God is demonstrating via precedent. This is the way you satisfy justice. In other words, you could put it this way. Remember the Levitical system? You got sacrifices, right? And you know that God's wrath needs to be satisfied. Well, you know now what it's really pointing to, yeah? Because God doesn't say, here, just offer sacrifice, it's going to be okay. There's something more. There's something higher than this that has to happen, than the sacrifices, that is. Y'all with me on this, okay? And now, this moment is a very gruesome moment. It will be locked into Israel's memory. Okay, Baal Peor will be locked into their memory. And I'll show you this later, maybe, when we get to Deuteronomy. But if I don't, it's there. This is going to be locked into their memory forever. They will have to remember this event and what it stands for. This is how God deals with sin. All right, so we got total apostasy here. We've got a definitive solution of God's wrath. And third, do you guys see in verse 7? Verse 7, you have this guy named Phinehas. Everyone see that guy? No? Maybe? Yes? Okay, so Phinehas, he is a very key person because the command was what? Impale these guys, yes? Impale the leaders. So Phinehas sees idolatry and fornication happening right in front of the tabernacle. You can see that in verse 6. And so this is what he does. He takes a spear and shish kebabs the guy and the gal. That's what he does. Just like that. Let's do it that way. So I don't know if I want to put a smile on his face. That'd be kind of weird. But he shish kebabs both guy and girl. Kills them both. Why? Because what was the punishment? Impale them. So what does he do? He impales them. He impales them. By the way, you know what's interesting? Is that the word you hear for how he pierced them through, this is going to be way later in the Old Testament, but it says in Zechariah 12:10 that Israel will mourn for the one that they have, anyone know? For the one that they have pierced. Same word. Same word. This is the punishment. God says, impale them. That's the punishment that needs to happen. Okay, fine. So he impales them. Okay, fine. We know that sets up for a whole construct of how God's wrath will be satisfied as one hangs on the tree, how one is pierced, boom, sets up for Jesus. Does this make sense to everybody? There's a lot of things going on here. But two things with Phineas. Here's the first thing. You learn about what it really means to have zeal for God. And what holiness really looks like. Zeal for God is when holiness wins. And that's it. And that anything else is eradicated. This is the visual, demonstrable way of putting sin to death. Quite in tangible terms. Second, Phineas, in fact, look at verse 13. It even talks about because he had zeal for the Lord, yes? He had zeal for the Lord. So he owns for the people of Israel. And so as a result of this, God says that because Phineas was so zealous, look at verse 13, that he will make with Phineas and his seed a what? Anyone see that? Verse 13 of 25? A what? A what? Say. A perpetual priesthood, an eternal covenant. Phineas will be the priestly line forever. Now, don't get confused. Phineas is one of Aaron's sons. Y'all with me on this? But now, it's not just any of Aaron's sons that can be priests. It's who? Phineas. Y'all with me on this? Does this make sense to everybody? Just a sneak peek into the future. Do you guys remember in the book of Samuel, there's this guy named Eli? Remember that? Remember him? No? He's kind of fat, and he's got problems, and Samuel tells him stuff. Remember this? Eli is not in the line of Phineas. So what is Eli actually? He's a fake. This is what you have to understand. He's an imposter. And so you have to get rid of him. Does this make sense to everybody? And so there's a lot of things that are happening. But God has promised Phineas an eternal priesthood, an enduring priesthood because of what he's done here. If you understand these three things about Baal Peor, total apostasy, God's wrath being satisfied, and Phineas having such zeal, which we need to remember because it's so important, but also this eternal covenant business, then we are in business with Numbers 25. Y'all there? We all good on this? Super important for things to come. All right. In any case, this is what ends the first generation. They die under such wrath. But here's the cool thing. If you stop and think about it, Phineas, is he part of the old generation? If he's part of the old generation, he should have been what? Killed. Is Phineas part of the old generation? No. His zeal is the zeal of the what? Of the new generation. That's what you have to understand. Y'all with me on this? His zeal is the zeal of the new generation. You see, you can't forget this, and this leads us to the next page in the main point. When you refine something, is that you just destroying something? No. Okay? For example, if you're refining gold, you're not just destroying it. Here, give me your ring so I can clean it. Oh, you mean so you'll get rid of it? No, we don't think that, right? Refining means remove the impurity so that you have something better in the end, yes? You don't just do an extreme home makeover by destroying something to leave it destroyed. And so God is going to refine Israel. Yes, he removes the first generation that's totally wicked, but he raises and purifies the second generation that is zealous for him. You just met one of the guys who's that. Who is he? His name is Phineas. Does this start to make sense to everybody? Okay? Phineas is one of those guys. Zealous for God. And that introduces us to the main point of chapter 26. God has raised up a holy people. God has raised up a holy people. God has raised up a holy people. Like I said, this is the victory of God's holiness. That God actually can refine and shape people and generations. Does this make sense to everybody? That's the victory of God. And so this is a new generation, really a new day, and we've got to hustle through this. So get ready. Point 1, we have a new census, all right? A new census. Now, if you look at chapter 26, you need to compare this with the first chapter. You need to compare the two censuses, whatever you want to call them. And here's what you're going to learn. First, Manasseh as a tribe increases. It's sky high. And you should ask the question, what? What question are you supposed to ask? Why? So we're going to answer that question later, but just know Manasseh goes up, and you should ask why. Second, you need to know this, that Simeon, the line of Simeon, the tribe of Simeon, it goes way down. And I'll tell you why. Because guess who were the main idolaters at Baal Peor? The tribe of what? Simeon. And so Simeon goes down almost to non-existence. They still exist. I said almost. Okay? They're going to get subsumed into the tribe of Judah because they're so itty-bitty. Y'all with me on this? Okay? Judah stays the same. Still dominant. Why? Because they're the what? Yeah, the royal tribe. They're the tribe of the what? Of the seed, the king. So they're okay. Here's one last thing. Have you ever heard of the sons of Korah? Not the band, the people in the Bible. Okay? They're actually mentioned in chapter 26. And do you guys remember there was this rebellion of the earth swallowing up people? Remember that? Korah was part of that rebellion. Korah was part of that rebellion. The sons of Korah are his sons who did not side with their father. Everyone got that? Are you following me here? Korah, he's the bad guy who said, down with God's system. I don't think Aaron should be upset. And then the earth's like, I got something to say to you. And then eats them. Okay? Everyone with me on this? But his sons did not side with him. His sons did not side with him. Look at chapter 26, verse 11. Okay, if you don't believe me. Okay? And the sons of Korah, what does it say? They did not what? They did not die. Why would they have died? Why could they have died? Why might have they died? Because they were with Dad when what? The earth went wah, wah, and killed them, yes? But that doesn't happen because they did not take Korah's side. And here's what's interesting. The sons of Korah, they have a lot of critical psalms. They have a lot of critical psalms about trusting and relying on God's grace and promise, which make a whole bunch of sense because that's what they had to do to what? To survive. That's their life story. Literally, their life story. So, in light of this, you have a new generation arising that knows how to worship God. That God has still been faithful to preserve that royal seed. And there's going to be some that rise for a very good reason, to reflect that. That gets us to point 2. We there? You have this issue with Zelophehad's daughters. If you're like, how do you spell that? Just turn to chapter 27 and copy it. And you're like, where is it? First verse. The daughters of Zelophehad. Zelophehad's daughters. So copy that word down. Zelophehad's daughters. That's how you spell it, the way your Bible has spelled it. Now, the Zelophehad's daughters, they come up to Moses and they say, hey, Moses, we got a problem. You see, we have no brothers, and our father's dead. And our concern is that we're going to lose our inheritance in the promised land. Y'all with me on this? Does this make sense? Because we're women. And so we want to appeal to you and to God that you should not write us out just because we're women. Y'all with me on this? Now, there are two things happening here. One's the big deal. The other one is a big deal nowadays. But, well, it would be a big deal later on too. But here's the biggest deal. The first generation, do they want to go into the land? The answer is what? No. What are these daughters concerned about? Our inheritance where? In the land. They say, we're going to go to this land. And we know this land is our land. This land is our home. And so we care so much, we don't want to lose our inheritance there. Do you see a total reversal of desire, of passion in this second generation? By the way, these daughters are from the tribe of Manasseh. What did I say about Manasseh in the census? They went what? Way up. Now you know why, right? Because God said, look at Manasseh. Look at that tribe. They are on fire for me. So therefore, I will what? Increase their number. Does this start to make sense to everybody? That is what is going on. So guess what Moses says, and this relates to number 1 and number 2, of the 2 things you need to know about Zelophehad's daughters. Moses and God say, it doesn't matter if you're male or female, you can own that property. Now, first, God acknowledges that indeed this generation, this new generation is zealous for him. Therefore, this is God's victory of holy refining. Yes? But here's the second thing. You have to realize, and this plays big nowadays, but it would have played big back then. This was revolutionary because women are allowed to own what? Property. So sometimes people are like, oh, look, the Bible's so showing us there. You're like, Zelophehad's daughters? Hello? I mean, they own property. You can't take their rights away, property rights away, and all this kind of stuff. I mean, they're equal to men. The Bible is hip. So I mean, come on. This is revolutionary, all right? But don't lose sight of it. It shows you how passionate this first generation is about God. All right, next page. And now we have to hustle. Okay? Point 3. You need a new leader. Why? Because who can't enter the promised land? Moses. So God raises up a new person. You know who he is. Who is he? Joshua. Look at the wording of chapter 27, verse 17 quickly with me. Notice, what does God call Joshua? What does he say? He will be like what? We're in chapter 27, verse 17. He'll go before them, come in after them, go out with them to bring them home. A shepherd. Shepherd. The leader of Israel is a what? Is a shepherd. Okay? Very important. All these ideas are going to start to merge because after all, David later beyond becomes a what? A shepherd. But David knows the Lord is what? My shepherd. And then when Jesus says, I am the what? The good shepherd, now you start to connect all the dots. Does this make sense to everybody? Don't fail to pick up on certain things. All right? Don't fail to pick up on certain things. So leadership is going. And the theology of leadership is continuing. Raising up a worshipful community. Point 4, you have a calendar of worship. This is how you're going to worship when you're in the land. Raising up point 5, a pure community. This is about how Israel must be holy. And how they must have holy justice. Point 5 is really, really important because God will use Israel to say, hey, look, you've got to get rid of any pagan influences. And remember those women that came in and seduced the men in the camp at what event? Anyone remember? Baal, Peor. Do you remember that? You got to get rid of them. You got to get rid of them. So Israel launches an offensive and eradicates those sinful influences. They go against Midian. You can see that in point 5a. Are we there? You all see that? Good. And they even get Balaam. They nail him, right? This is like the Bin Laden of Israel at the time. You know, they just get Balaam because he's such a bad influence. And so they kill him. Then, here's what's crazy. Letter B. They walk through the camp and they realize that the Israelite men have taken all the women captive for like themselves. Is that a good move or bad move? That's a bad move. They're like, hello, that was the problem at Baal Peor. Hello, guys. Like, did you not learn anything? So they have to cleanse themselves once again. Now, next page. Here's what's important and crazy all at the same time. Important and crazy all at the same time. They take a head count of everyone who died in battle. Y'all with me on this? And in letter C, verses 25 through 54, here's what you learn. No one dies. That's what they establish. No one died in battle. Now, let's be clear. From this point, up to this point, and from this point forward, Israel doesn't have casualties in battle. Is that normal or not normal? That's not normal, right? I mean, I wish it's normal in the movies, more on that in a different day, but it's not normal here, in real life, in this universe called the earth, okay? It's not normal. But Israel thought it was normal. Because whenever you go out to fight a battle, everyone comes what? Everyone comes home. It's like a chore. Take out the trash and go kill the Midianites, you know, and be back home in time for dinner. Okay, if you're late, you're going to be in trouble. So they're more worried about like getting home in time than actually surviving. But they don't care because God's on their side. Y'all with me on this? This will be very important when you get to the book of Joshua. Okay, this will be very important when you get to the book of Joshua. More on that when we get to the book of Joshua. Now, point 6, raising up a settled community. We got to hustle here. There are 3 or 2.5 tribes really that go on the other side of the Jordan. Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of what? Manasseh. You guys remember that? You should remember that. It's an important fact to know. Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh settle on the eastern side of the Jordan. Now here's what's important. That side technically, although under Israelite control, is technically not the promised land. Did you hear the difference between the two? It is under Israelite control. It will have Israelite influence, but it's not the promised land. Promised land is on what side of the Jordan? The west side. Y'all with me on this? Not on the east side, the west side. And you say, why is that important? Because this is going to be a beginning of some problems that Israel is going to have. Okay, this is the beginning of some problems that Israel is going to have. All right. On one hand, this testifies, yes, if you can settle one half of the land, then you can settle what? The other side. But on the other hand, this is going to raise up some problems. In fact, have you heard the phrase, be sure your sin will find you what? Out. That's in this chapter. It's a warning against Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh. You're playing a dangerous game doing this, but we'll let you do it. But be sure your sin will what? Find you out. Okay? This is going to play later on, and this again sets up for Joshua. Well, and then God has been faithful. He's showed his faithfulness even in that because he shows, hey, you can really settle the land. You guys can do it. And so they are a nation of conquerors, letter point 8. Point 9, they are a physically organized nation. And, next page. Raising up a spiritually and judicially organized nation. There are these cities of Levites. There are the cities of refuge. Do you guys know the cities of refuge and what they are? If you accidentally kill somebody, you can what? Flee there. God wants to emphasize life so much that he organizes Israel's infrastructure around it. Okay, he organizes Israel's infrastructure around it. You can just jot a note here under Numbers. In Deuteronomy, it even talks about the care of roads so that you actually make it easy for somebody who accidentally kills somebody to what? Get to the city of refuge. Because if you have terrible roads, then you're going to like stumble and fall, and then the guy who's like the executioner, he's going to catch you and kill you. Does this make sense to everybody? So God cares about life, and he's raising up a holy generation to live a holy life. Point 11, we there? Chapter 36. Chapter 36. Final chapter. Do you guys remember Zelophehad's what? Daughters. They're from what tribe? Manasseh. What tribe grew a lot? Manasseh. And there's a for that. It's not just Zelophehad's daughters. In chapter 36, the tribal leaders of Manasseh come to Moses and say, okay, look, we got a problem. You see, we're very concerned about our tribe and making sure that we have the full inheritance that God gave us. If the daughters of Zelophehad marry from a different tribe, their territory will go what? To that other what? Tribe. And our tribe will shrink. We want the fullness of what God gave us. So can you make an additional requirement that the daughters of Zelophehad have to marry inside Manasseh? Does this make sense to everybody? Okay. And what does this show you about the tribe of Manasseh? Do they care about the land? Do they want to go into the promised land? Absolutely. You have a totally different generation from beginning to end. One that wants to go to the promised land to live a holy life for God. And that's what you see at the latter half of the book. Does this make sense to everybody? God refined. He brought up and raised up a people who are ready to go into the land. So now you need to do what? Go into the land. And that is going to require preparation, and that's Deuteronomy. So turn there with me to the book of Deuteronomy. Like we just said, and here's the authorship and setting. God has raised up a new generation. A new generation, one that is a holy people. They are zealous for him, like Phinehas demonstrates, and they are ready to enter the land. But to do that, they need some instruction. They need some instruction. One, because they're a new generation. Two, because they need to know the full theology of the law. Full theology of the law. Put it this way. We said that the law is meant to teach. It doesn't save you, it what? It teaches. You all with me on this? And we said within that, things like the Levitical system or even the law, they all are what? It starts with an M. Models. Yes? But don't you need to know what it models? Don't you need to know what the model is imitating or reflecting? Doesn't that make sense to everybody? And so Deuteronomy explains that full theology that is expressed in the model, and it does so not only showing the content of what the model ultimately is about, but the direction that everything is going in. The content of the model, what the model is supposed to be talking about, the theology of it, as well as the direction that it is going in, the direction that it's heading. Y'all with me on this? Put it this way, Deuteronomy is Israel's constitution. It tells you everything that drives this nation, ultimately. Yeah, it's got laws. Deuteronomy does, but Israel does. But at the core of what it is, it's the Constitution. Just like our Constitution is supposed to be the governing document, the principles, the values that drive this country in a greater way, this is a Constitution that not only shows you the principles and stuff that drive the operations of this country Israel, this is the Constitution that defines its destiny. This is the Constitution that defines its destiny. Y'all with me on this? Okay? And so for the next, 25 minutes or so, we're going to walk through this book as rapidly as we can. And I'm going to try to give you the most important points as best as I can. Because this is, you got to think about it. If this is the Constitution of Israel that defines the destiny of everything forever, it's a really important book. Yeah? But because I'm a fair person, I guess, then I don't want to give too much attention to it because I want to show I'm an equal opportunity book person. Does that make sense? So I don't spend the whole semester on Deuteronomy, even though I could, but I don't. Okay? And this helps to cast and avoid any aspersions because I just finished writing a commentary on Deuteronomy, so people are like, oh, you're going to just talk about Deuteronomy. No, 25 minutes. See, I'm very fair, right? So you can't nail me on this, all right? I disavow any partiality here. But it is, super important. In fact, I'll just give you one illustration of this. When I was writing the commentary on Deuteronomy, I was speaking at a different church, and there was a sweet lady at that church, and she said, what are you writing on? And I told her these books. She goes, oh, those sound interesting. And then I said, oh, and I'm also writing a commentary on Deuteronomy. She's like, why would you write a book on that? And I was like, it's in the Bible, it's really important, shapes Israel's destiny, future, everything. She's like, yeah, whatever. We all know that the most important thing in the Bible is to love God with all your heart. And I kind of looked at her and said, ma'am, you know that's in the book of Deuteronomy, right? And she's like, oh, well that's a good reason to write on it, isn't it now? All right, well this is an important book. This is a very important book, so we need to nail this down. So everyone got authorship and setting more or less, and here's the theological theme. God prepares the nation to be his nation in the land. That's really what's going on. God prepares the nation to be his nation in the land, or God renews his covenant with Israel. Everything's around this book. So let me explain to you the contents of this book. Ready? Here we go. In relation to the contents of this book, what God does is he first explains to Israel, this is where you have been. This is where you have been. These are the key values that you should have learned. Then he says, Israel, I'm going to give you a hint at where you're going to go. I'm going to give you a look at your future. And I'm going to tell you this. What makes your past and what makes your future is this book. So listen carefully. Y'all with me on this? It's a really snazzy introduction in my mind. Then he lays out the 10 Commandments. And you're like, we already heard these before. Yeah, but this is the heart of God. We already said that the 10 Commandments link back to what? Anyone remember? Creation. Very good. They link back to creation. And so Moses now is going to give the full theology of that. Y'all with me on this? And so he doesn't just lay out the Ten Commandments, he's going to lay out the Ten Commandments and all these principles about what those Ten Commandments ultimately signify. You all with me on this? And what they ultimately signify is this, and you guys know it. The Lord your God is one. You shall love what? The Lord your God. That's what it's all about. You want to know what this model is all about? The model is about a holy God who wants you to what? Love him. And so actually Deuteronomy becomes the book that defines the nature of love. And so for kind of the bunch of chapters, God is going to define the nature of love. After that, God will describe what specifically that looks like. So he's described it in principle, the Ten Commandments, and now he's going to describe it specifically. And when he does so, this is what he's going to do. All those, you guys read, when you read Deuteronomy, you might have thought, man, there's just a bunch of random laws. Yeah? They're not random. They're actually arranged around the Ten Commandments. That's what's going on there. They're arranged around the Ten Commandments. And so each of these laws helps you to understand the Ten Commandments better. They also help you to understand the theology of it. They also help you to understand how to specifically live out those commandments in your life so that you will love God. You all with me on this? So God has said, hey, Israel, your past and your future, they depend on if you really understand what God is getting at. Here's what God is getting at. The Ten Commandments, but really behind the Ten Commandments, the theology of creation, which is all revolving around God's holiness and love. Here's how you live that out specifically and understand it better. But then God concludes with this. He concludes with blessings and curses, and then the rest of Israel's future. Blessings and curses and the rest of Israel's future. Remember how I said that this Constitution tells you the content of what God is all about as well as the direction? Well, that's exactly it. God in chapter 30, you should know that specifically, in chapter 30 specifically, he's going to lay out the whole future for Israel. And actually, everything in the New Testament into 30. A lot. For that very reason. So you got to master chapter 30. All right? That's the overview of the book. For people in that generation, letter B, this sets their worldview for how they live now, how they understand the past, and how they understand the what? Guess. Past, present, and future. You got it. This is everything. This is everything. They understand the heart of God. They should have understood through this that God wasn't just about rules. Yes, he has rules. Yes, you should obey them, Israel. But there is a purpose behind that. Deuteronomy gives that purpose. And that purpose is going to take them somewhere. They should have understood all that. Letter C, this book is the Constitution of Israel. It thereby is formative for our worldview. If you understand this book, you will understand the rest of the Bible. You will understand the heart of God. And you will understand where history is going. It's that important. It's that important. So, with that in mind, in the remaining 20 minutes, we're going to cover it. Overview of contents, yep, you can see the law structure, great. Next page. Here we go. Preamble, main point. There, this is the book that makes the difference between past and future. That's the main point. This is the book that makes the difference between past and future. If you look at Deuteronomy chapter 1, 1 through 5, scan it, here's what you're going to see. All these towns, Moses is giving this sermon. Oh, by the way, you're going to see this. This is not just a law document. This is the sermon. This is a sermon. How do we know that? Because it says so. It says these are the words, not laws or regulations. These are the words. And Moses in chapter 1, verse 5 is going to undertake explaining these words. This is a sermon. Okay? This is like a legal sermon, but it's a sermon. So it's expository preaching, one of the earliest ones we ever have. And it's 32 chapters. It's like one sermon, right? You're like, well, that would be a long sermon. Yeah, maybe we should give longer time for chapel. Okay, anyway, so that I'm just kidding. No, but this is a sermon. This is a sermon. And this sermon is taking place at the plains of Moab. And here's the point. Behind Israel is the wilderness, which is also known as their death and judgment, yes? Before Israel, they're looking into where? The promised land. God put Moses at that specific geographical location to say, this sermon is going to make your destiny. So pay attention. Make sense to everybody? Good. Next point. Point 2. Here's the main point. God's continuous faithfulness recounted. God's continuous faithfulness recounted. We don't have time to go in detail about this historical prologue, but know this. A lot of the lessons I've been emphasizing on faith, on the nature of a real leader, on justice and righteousness, they're all here. Does this make sense to everybody? And now we move to the next section. Oh, wait, just kidding. There's something I need to tell you. Point 8. We there? On the next page, 118-ish or whatever. There's something you need to know. Okay? One thing you need to know, since I'll just tuck it in here. Look at verse 3. Moses is exhorting them to obedience, and notice what he says. Your eyes saw what Yahweh did where? 4, 3, and 4. What does he say? At where? Baal what? Peor. Remember how I said that's the precedent for everything? I wasn't kidding. Moses believes it. So it's the truth. But even more than that, notice this. Okay? Notice what God is going to say to Israel. Look at verse 6. Someone read out loud quickly, please.
Keep them and do them, for that will be your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the people.
Stop right there. When Israel lives out the law and lives out the theology of the law, who's going to see it? Who's going to see it? In the eyes of the who? The nations. Israel's supposed to have an international what? We can see it right there. And even more than that, what will the nations say? They will say that this is wisdom and what? Understanding. This is what sets up for, you guys remember a certain kind of literature we have in the Bible? It's called wisdom literature, yes? This is setting up for that. Wisdom literature is Deuteronomy applied. Wisdom literature is Deuteronomy applied. Okay? And the nations need to see it. Next page. Now, I'm just going to summarize this very quickly, and you just jot some notes down, but because we're going to cover it later. God here gives a sneak peek into Israel's future for a lot of different reasons. God gives a sneak peek into Israel's future. He says, hey, look, this is the plan. God's going to use you to impact the nations, but you're going to fail. And you're going to go into exile. But God will return you home. Everyone got that? You will go into exile, but God will return you home. Now, he doesn't tell you how that's going to happen. He just tells you that it will happen. And by the way, okay, letter D, 4, 9 through 12 and following, and 4:32 through 40 give some of the best descriptions of God's uniqueness and his faithfulness. Some of the most beautiful things, like ask from the time that man was created. One man was created. Emphasizes the historical Adam, doesn't it? If God has ever done something like this before, how he's loved you, Israel. It's powerful to realize the historical realities of our God's faithfulness and that he will complete his purposes for his people. Well, in any case, having said all this, now that segues into the Ten Commandments. Turn there. Next page. Good. Main point. The heart of the law. What does the model point to? What does the model point to? The heart of the law. What does the model point to? When you're dealing with the Ten Commandments, letters A and B, okay, letters A and B, we've already gone through this. We know that there's a theology of creation, all right? And on top of that, the Sabbath is modified a little bit in the Ten Commandments to emphasize redemption. So creation and redemption, they're going to go hand in hand in this book. Creation and redemption are going to go hand in hand in this book. All right? By the way, point C, proper response, read that section. Not necessarily, I wish I could test you on everything in this class, but we can't always. But this is something for your life. This is the true response you're supposed to have to God, where you are just zealous to know him, right? In any case, we know that there's a theology of the law. We want the core, that theology, and that's found in chapter 6. If you have me for Essentials of Christian Thought, you know that I have stressed this before. But look at chapter 6, verse 1. Do you see how it says, this is the commandment? Everyone see that? This is the commandment. Singular or plural? Singular. This is the one command you need to know about the law. This is the command that drives the whole law. And what is it? Chapter 6, verse 4. This is the famous Shema. You need to know that passage. Yahweh is, and this is the phrase, is one Yahweh. That's the best translation. Not just Yahweh our God, Yahweh is one, but actually Yahweh is one Yahweh. That is the best translation of it. You say, why? Oh, okay, I can't give you all the reasons. But so what? Do you guys remember in Genesis 2? Husband and wife, they become what? One flesh. This is the same wording. This is the same wording. This is what establishes two realities simultaneously. Primarily, it shows this. God is one. God is really one. He is indivisible. He doesn't share his glory with anybody what? Else. Why? Because he's one. Count them. How many? One. This shows there's monotheism. This shows that there's exclusivity. This shows that he's in a category altogether himself. Why? Because he's the only what? One. But if you understand the construction, the two become what? One. Then this already holds in tension that within the Godhead there might be what? Persons, even as they are what? One. Does this make sense to everybody? And if you understand that, then you understand the whole dynamic that comes out. What's the next verse? 6:5. You shall what? Love. Why? Because that's what happens within the Godhead. That's the relationalness that happens within the Godhead. And in fact, the allusion to husband-wife relationship is the very relationship you are to have with who? Yahweh. Put it this way. When you get married, you and your spouse are standing there, and the pastor says, this is the one for you. Yes? He or she is the only one for you. This is that one. All your love goes to what? That one. Does this start to make sense to everybody? And so how do you celebrate or how do you live out God's exclusive, unique, singular, unified oneness? You what? You love him and him what? Alone. Because then you know that there is only what? One. All your affections go to him and no other. And that's the nature of loving God. By the way, this then provides a definition of the nature of loving God. And let me just walk you through this. What is it? It'd be tragic to love God in all the wrong ways, yeah? Wouldn't it be? And so Moses defines what love is. And here we go. Like verse 6. You put his word on your heart. You think loving God might be having a great emotion when you sing. That could be included, but that's not primary. What's primary? Put God's word on your what? On your heart. Bind it to your forehead. Verse 7, teach your children. You want to know what it means to love God? Teach your children God's word. In fact, the word teach your children actually is the word to make sharp. Your children should be Bible experts. You should never stop until they just understand God's word forwards and backwards. Why? Because when you do that, that's love for God. You might say, that doesn't sound very loving to me. Well, we didn't ask you. Okay? I mean, that's like in the counseling session, the husband says, oh, I gave my wife chocolate every day. You know I'm deathly allergic, right? Because we said that on the first date. And I would say in that situation, you trying to murder her? It's like, is that what you're trying to do? Or are you trying to love her? Like, right. So look, you need to understand, we don't love God on our terms. We love him on what? His. And so you bind his word, and you do it, and you write it on your doorpost, and you put it on your hand so that it's everywhere around you, and you're always thinking about him. He says that's love. That's real love. And you go out, and when you come back, and everything, it's all about him. And you don't forget, letter C. This is so important. Forgetting in Deuteronomy and for the rest of the Bible is an act of hatred. If I ever have an opportunity to preach in chapel again, I'm always considering, I have like a notebook to myself, forgetting is actually probably the biblical terminology for what we call apathy. Because forgetting is when you do nothing. Think about that. Forgetting is when you do nothing. You just let something slip away. It's when you're passive. And God says, this is what you need to understand. You want to hate me? Forget. Apathy or forgetfulness is an act of hatred against God. He says, look, it's not that you just don't forget me, it's also you don't twist my character. Letter D, don't test. Don't test. And how do you solve all of that? Letter E, you teach future generations. You teach future generations why they should love me. All the reasons that they should love me and that this law is about a love for God. Teach them that. Letter F, 7, 1 through 11. You know there's this whole issue about why kill the Canaanites. And in 7, 1 through 11, here's what you learn. You love God by what you hate. You love God by what you hate. Because God says if you start to let these Canaanites live and you marry amongst them, they will turn your heart away from God. Hear that language? Turn your heart. You're supposed to love God with all your what? Heart. Oh, by the way, right? The law is not just about rule keeping, yes? It's about your what? Your heart. Never forget that. Super important. Heart is emphasized in Deuteronomy like crazy. Like crazy. So don't let them turn your heart away from him. If you love every woman the same way you love your wife, we have a word for that. It's adultery. You love God by what you reject. Chapter 7. It shows that. Letter H, we there, closing exhortation. Here's another way you love God. You love God by not, just write this down, by not being proud. By not being proud. Self-sufficient. Self-sufficient. Okay? Pride is where you try to bring yourself up to God. Does this make sense? Next page. This is super important. Don't be self-righteous. If pride is bringing yourself up to God, self-righteousness is actually bringing God what? Down. Because self-righteousness says this, I deserve it. I deserve it. God, you owe me something. Does this make sense? Pride says, I can do it on my own. I can rise up to the heights of God. That's what happens in chapter 8, because he says, by my power, by my might, I can do these things. God says, don't do that. That's an act of hatred. Chapter 9 is where it says this, by my righteousness. Do not say in your heart. Look at verse 9, chapter 9, verse 4. Key word is what? Do not say in your heart. It's all about the heart. Oh, because of my righteousness, God did this. God owed me something. Folks, you have to understand this. Following rules is not bad. You can be a legalist by following rules, but you can also be a legalist by what? Not following rules. The issue isn't about rule following. The issue is about self what? Righteousness. You can say, look, I'm so good because I don't follow rules like those losers over there. You have become what? Self-righteous. And you actually are a what? A legalist at that moment. And you can do the same thing by saying, I follow rules, unlike that liberal over there, and you have become self what? Righteous. And you are a legalist. Does this make sense to everybody? The irony is that the Bible defines legalism, and the double irony is that every Israelite fell into what? That legalism. Deuteronomy's like, don't do this. Don't be self-righteous. And the Pharisees are like, okay, I'm righteous. You're like, forget it. So and the reason that this is a problem, and it's really funny, because Moses just goes off. He's like, let me explain to you why you can't be self-righteous. Because you're evil. And he just starts going on and on and on. It's really funny to read. And he's like, guys, from the very day I met you, you were evil. He's like, I've lived with your evilness for 40 years. He's like, this is driving me crazy. You are evil. And it's really funny to read. It's very emotional. I love it. So here's what Moses says. Here's what you need to understand. You want to know, chapter 10, what you really should do? It's very simple. It's very simple. What does the Lord require from you? Pursue him. Pursue him. And look at verse 16. So key. So key. What does it say in verse 16? Quickly.
Circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart.
Everyone hear that? Circumcise your heart. Everyone hear that? What are you supposed to do? You're supposed to love the Lord your God with all your what? Heart. But Israel always is going to want to be self-righteous. God says, I got the remedy to that. Since it's all about your heart, you need a what? Circumcise your what? Heart. Everyone got that. Super important. God says, You got to do this. Okay. So then, for a bunch of laws, next page, and I'm just going to cover these in a hurry, and then we're going to wrap it up. A bunch of these laws, God is going to explain, here's the theology of what I'm talking about. Here is also the specifics of what I want you to do with your life. And there are some that we really, really need to pay attention to. And I'm going to go with you through that rapidly. Okay, one of them, you need to know Deuteronomy 12. There's going to be one place of worship. Why? Because how many gods do you have? One. Doesn't that start to make sense? Okay. You should know those 3 annual feasts. Here's another one, point 5 in your notes. The 5th commandment. There is the law of the king. Honor your father and what? Mother. Therefore you should honor the king. Honor all human authority. But the king has a rule because he's ruling under God's authority. That's the theology of Deuteronomy. It's not just that, hey, you just submit to your rulers, but you have to realize rulers in Israel, they submit to God's authority. And therefore, the king to multiply 3 things. 3 G's. Ready? Gold, gals, giddy up. You need to know that. Gold, gals, giddy up. Gold is gold, gals are women, giddy up is horses. Kings do not multiply those 3 things. Why? So that they always trust who? God. Not their power, not their money, not the size of their household. Y'all with me on this? On top of that, you also need to know this. There will be a prophet like Moses. There will be a prophet like Moses. Chapter 18. There are other commands, and I wish we had more time to cover them, but those are some of the key ones you need to understand. Oh, yeah, those are some of the key ones that you need to understand. Turn to the blessings and there will be blessings and curses. You need to know that. That sets history. But now you need to turn to chapter 29 in your notes. That's point 6, I believe, page 129-ish. We there? We there? This is what God says in Deuteronomy 29. I told you that you should circumcise what? Your heart. But in Deuteronomy 29 it says this, God did not give you a heart to know or to love him. Everyone see the problem? Do you see the problem? You are to love the Lord your God with all your heart. Great. How do I do that? Circumcise your heart. Great. You can't. Great. And then Israel's thinking, what are they thinking? How do we do what we cannot what? Do. Are y'all with me on this? Deuteronomy 29, verse 29, the secret things belong what? To the Lord. It actually is about Calvinism and Arminianism. Okay? But here's the answer. Chapter 30. Chapter 30. Write this down. God says, let me tell you what's going to happen in your future. Let me tell you what's going to happen in your future. Chapter 30, God says, I'm going to bring you home. Things are going to come upon your heart when you realize your sin. And in chapter 30, verse 6, anyone got that? Can you read it?
Moreover, the Lord your God will circumcise your heart.
Stop. Moreover, the Lord your God will what? Circumcise your heart. That's the new covenant. And here's what Moses is saying. Israel, God in this model has always been about you loving him from your what? Heart. And the only way you can love him from your heart is if you have a what kind of heart? Circumcised heart. But you can't have a what? Circumcised heart. So you're going to go into exile. When you go into exile, there will be a day when, since you can't circumcise your heart, what? God will do it for you. Watch out for that time. There will be a covenant made where God will circumcise your heart. This sets up for the what covenant? Just guess. The new covenant. Y'all with me on this? And the book keeps moving and explains this further in Deuteronomy 32. But then you have the death of Moses. And by the way, here's what's interesting about the death of Moses. Some people say, how could Moses write about his own death? Yeah, like how could Jesus predict his own death? It's like, it's not that hard if you got God on your side. And in fact, that's actually the point. Moses is predicting his own death to point Israel to the what? Not to the past or the present, but to the what? To the future. In fact, there's language in this text that remind Moses that he's going to be like Abraham. Though, did Abraham see the fulfillment of the promises? Did he? Did Abraham see the fulfillment? No. Does Moses see the fulfillment of the promises? But the hope is what? One day they will. And so Israel's being pointed to the future. Y'all with me on this? And notice the last lines. up to that time, there has been not a prophet like who? Like Moses. You need to watch out for the prophet like Moses. Y'all with me on this? Because that guy, when he comes, he's going to circumcise what? Your heart. So, think with me. Where did Moses get the law? Mountain. And in Matthew, what do you have? Jesus standing on a what? Mountain. And think about it with me. In Deuteronomy, you know they're evil, they're sinful. They always then will be under God's blessing or curse. Which one? Curse. Curse, 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 curse. What are Jesus' first words on the Sermon on the Mount? What's the first words out of his mouth? Blessed. Why? Everything will turn around since he will circumcise what? Your heart. He's the prophet like Moses. Deuteronomy moves in that direction. Have a good day.